Bible is the cornerstone for a number of religions and doctrines, as well as a source for debates and disputes. And while its words are revered by a number of people, what do we know of its origins? What of ancient Egypt, from where the Hebrews left? If you're like us, our exposure has been pictures of animal-headed gods and goddesses, with the words pagan and idol worship mixed in with just about everything said of ancient Egypt. But when we began looking beneath the surface of what we were told about Egypt, a different picture started emerging. Scholars and historians usually work outside religious dogma to uncover hard facts, tangible evidence to support their theories on different cultures. These scholars and historians, including leading theologians, all agree that similarities and dissimilarities exist between ancient Egypt and the Bible. Dissimilarities will reveal the cultures that separated as the Israelites evolved. There's no reason to challenge that. It's culture versus culture. But the similarities we're going to show reveals the profound connections of their religious practices at the earliest stages. As you'll see, the Hebrews brought more out of Egypt than just the silver and gold. Over the past 200 years, strides in the development and discoveries of archaeology has provided us with direct access to documents and artifacts from the lands of the Bible. Many discoveries are much older than the Bible. This has led to startling revelations and questions regarding the stories in the Old Testament. For instance, did you know that 1,300 years before the birth of Yeshua, Jesus, 2 or 3 centuries before David and Solomon, a pharaoh by the name of Akhenaten is recorded as ushering in a period of monotheism within Egypt? That little piece of information sent us on a quest to search inside ancient Egypt, discovering and untangling intriguing parallels between the Hebrews and Egyptians as recorded in the Bible and Egyptian texts and iconography. As you're considering this evidence, bear in mind the scripture from Deuteronomy 12:4, "You shall not worship the Lord your God in their way." Perhaps it's time we rethink what we've been told about Egypt. Throughout recent history, notable scholars and historians have theorized if Akhenaten and Moses was one and the same. We don't believe he was, but we do believe there is compelling evidence to point to the identity of Moses. If you're interested, we encourage you to check out our interview with author Graham Phillips. He provides a very thought-provoking theory based on historical records. We warn you up front that it may cause you to rethink parts of biblical history. 2 Samuel 7:6. Whereas I have not dwelt in any house since the time that I brought up the children of Israel out of Egypt, even to this day, but have walked in a tent and in a tabernacle. What does this mean, I have not dwelt in any house since the time I brought up the children of Israel out of Egypt? This verse indicates that the God of the Hebrews dwelt in a house, a temple, in Egypt prior to the Exodus. I want to honor that this verse may make some of you uncomfortable or confused. It did us when we first read it, and we tucked it away because we couldn't explain it. We had always believed the religious acts and sacred objects of Israelite religion were unique to their culture. We would come back to this verse many times in our research. We hope this presentation, along with the Ancient Egyptian and Bible series, will help shed light on some confusing elements that we all may have struggled with at some point. We became intrigued by obvious parallels to Egypt as we studied the Hebrew texts. Our goal is to provide you with an overview of some of the more obvious parallels and connections. If you like what you see, we encourage you to check out the other videos in this series. Best-selling author Robert Feather has a great book that explores some of the parallels we'll discuss here. Black Holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We may not agree with all of his findings, but he's been a good resource in our research. He sets the stage for us to explore the 18th dynasty of Egypt, middle of the 14th century BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, known as the heretic king who rejected the worship of many gods and mandated worship of one god, Aten. Akhenaten was erased from history for 1600 years. He was all but lost with the passage of time, until the discovery of his city Akhenaten at Amarna during the late 19th century. How is it possible to hide such a powerful political leader for 1600 years and rewrite history? If that's possible, might the possibility also exist that other recorded histories have been concealed as well? That there's a whole story we may not be getting? That's what we hope to discover as we turn back to travel through the sands of time. What parallels can we find that Akhenaten may have with the texts that have come to be known as the Old Testament? The most obvious similarity between Akhenaten and Moses is the introduction of one God, monotheism. Both proclaimed and initiated one God. This new God was not one that was created by human hands. This God was invisible to all, but divine communication was reserved for Moses as well as Akhenaten. A stela from Akhenaten's early reign describes Akhenaten's plan to erect a building which would be dedicated to the deity he called Ra-Harakti in his name of Shu, who is the Aten. It was his attempt to start the process of merging the identities of Egyptian gods Ra and Horus with the god Aten, the sun disk representing the life-giving force of the universe. It was common practice in ancient Egypt for gods to merge identities, and Akhenaten may have been attempting to ease Egyptians into the idea of worshiping a single god. Who was this god, Aten? In the words of Egyptologist Jan Asman in his book, From Akhenaten to Moses, Ancient Egypt and Religious Change, Aten was a specific term given to the sun god and creator, who in all periods of pharaonic history was seen as the sole origin of the world and the highest god. In the perspective of moral philosophy, this is the only god that really counts, the one god on whom everything else, including the other gods, depends. Aten was not represented in human or animal form and had no cult image or priest in any temple. Where we see former kings and gods represented equally in Egyptian art, the absence of a god or gods in human form turns the focus to Akhenaten, as the Aten never speaks. The king alone is his high priest who possesses knowledge of his god, conveyed to his loyal followers via his, Akhenaten's, teaching. Does this sound like Moses' role in the Bible? While much has been written about Akhenaten and sun worship, his religion was not that. It was an understanding of a creator deity, best represented by the rays of the sun, giving and maintaining life in the world, with Akhenaten the high priest. Circumcision. The earliest mention can be found in Genesis 17:10. "This is my covenant, which you shall keep, between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised." If you haven't watched our video on the documentary hypothesis, we encourage you to do so, as most scholars and historians assign this verse to the priestly source. You may be surprised to learn that circumcision was practiced in ancient Egypt. The earliest depiction of Egyptian circumcision we have found is in a bas-relief in Saqqara, in Akhenaten's tomb, vizier of the pharaoh Teti dynasty, around 2345 BCE. The second parallel we want to draw your attention to is the great temple at Amarna. Akhenaten's temple that he constructed for his god. He built a separate capital, Akhenaten, today known as Amarna, on the east bank of the Nile River. The names of other gods were removed and the temples were closed. One of the most distinctive aspects of the temple was that there was no cult image of the god. Robert Feather points out that Ezekiel's descriptions differ from those in 1 Kings 6 through 8 and 2 Chronicles 2 through 4. He concludes that 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles were describing the temple in Jerusalem, and Ezekiel was describing a temple in another place. the great temple at Amarna. Let's move to the second parallel found at the great temple at Amarna, also known as the great temple of Theoten. There's an interesting verse in Ezekiel that talks about the singers in the court. Ezekiel 40:44 reads, "Outside the inner gate were the chambers for the singers in the inner court." There's no mention in the Tanakh of singers in the Temple of Jerusalem, but you can see depictions of singers in the side chamber of the great temple of Theoten. Let's examine the high priest as a prince. Ezekiel 46:12 reads, "Now when the prince shall prepare a voluntary burnt offering or peace offerings voluntarily unto the Lord, one shall then open him the gate that looks toward the east, and he shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings as he did on the Sabbath day. Then he shall go forth, and after his going forth, one shall shut the gate." No high priest in the Bible is referred to as having been a hereditary prince. However, Robert Feather notes that the high priest officiating at the great temple of Theoten, Mary Ra, was a hereditary prince. In Ezekiel 47 we read, "Behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the forefront of the house stood toward the east, and the waters came down from under the right side of the house, at the south side of the altar. Large quantities of water flowing into the temple? It cannot be Jerusalem near the Temple Mount." Let's continue with Ezekiel 47. "Then brought he me out of the gate northward, and led me about the way, without unto the utter gate by the way that looketh eastward. And behold, there ran out waters on the right side. And when the man that had the line in his hand went forth eastward, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the waters. The waters were to the ankles." Feather specifies the distance from the temple to the edge of the river is almost precisely the distance from the great temple of Theoten to ankle depth in the river Nile. There are other details about the parallels that you can read for yourself in his book. The Holy of Holies, also known as the Most Holy Place. It was the inner room of the tabernacle, and also Solomon's temple when it was built, where the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, cherubim, manna, Aaron's rod, and a copy of God's law were kept. It was also the place where blood was sprinkled on the mercy seat, the lid on top of the ark, as an atonement for the sins of Israel. The only people allowed to enter the Holy of Holies was the high priest, and he could only enter once a year. Temples in ancient Egypt were enclosures of restricted sacred space. Only priests had access to the inner workings of the temples and their mysteries. Inside many Egyptian temples was a sanctuary, a Holy of Holies, where only the priest could enter, just as we see in the Israelite version. Let's move to other interesting connections. The altar was the heart of the Holy Temple because divine service such as offerings and sacrifices were centered around it, as well as the individual and congregational sacrifices. It was a perfect square and was constructed of two main parts, the altar itself and the ascent ramp. On top of the altar at its four corners, there were small protrusions, or horns. Feather maintains that the details of the altar described in various parts of the Tanakh match almost precisely or are in simple ratio to those existing in the Great Temple at Amarna. Both altars were square. The tops of the altars had four horns, one on each corner. The altar described for the tabernacle was almost half, and the altar in Solomon's temple was almost double the size of the Great Temple altar. The direction of the stairwell leading up to both altars was eastwards. The stairway for the Amarna temple was almost precisely 14 cubits long, with a half-cubit border, as described in Ezekiel 43. Palm sheaths. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When you come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring a sheaf of the firstfruits of your harvest unto the priest. and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the Sabbath the priest shall wave it. Leviticus 23, 9-11. Waving of palm sheaves were not uncommon in ancient Egypt ceremonies. Here's a wall relief from the great temple of the Aten, showing priests in a ceremony waving palm sheaves. Scrolls. In the Museum of Luxor, there is a long wall of reconstructed scenes in and around the great temple of the Aten. You'll see the figure of a priest parading a covered, decorated scroll, much like we see in synagogues today. Robert Feather remarks that the parading of the Torah scroll reflected in the great temple of the Aten came to be repeated in the Jerusalem temple and is still carried down to this day. The showbread. And thou shalt set upon the table showbread before me always. Exodus 25:30. This is a drawing of a relief on the wall of the tomb of Appi at Amarna, showing 12 loaves of bread on the table in front of the altar. We now turn to look at the Ark of the Covenant. The Hebrew term for the Ark of the Covenant is Aron, and this word simply means a chest, box, casket, or coffin. Please note that it is not the same word as found in reference to Noah's Ark. According to Strong's definition legend, Ark comes from the Hebrew word meaning a box, ark, chest, but do you also see the word coffin? This is an important clue that leads us to the Egyptian sacred bark, which I'll show in a minute. Exodus 25:10-21 describes the construction of the Ark of the Covenant. The ark and cherubim used by the Israelites were similar to the ancient Egyptians' sacred barks and winged guardians. We aren't suggesting that the Ark of the Covenant was indeed an Egyptian sacred bark, but it may have served as a model, which the Israelites adapted for their own needs. The book of Exodus gives detailed features of the Ark of the Covenant. 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5 cubits, gilded entirely with gold. Crown molding of gold was to be put around it. 4 rings of gold, 2 on each side, attached to 4 corners through which wooden poles were inserted, never to be removed. The caporet, a gold lid traditionally known as the mercy seat in Christian translations, was placed on top. 2 golden cherubim placed on top of the ark as a covering. The ark was placed under the veil of the covering. We don't have any actual depictions of the Ark of the Covenant. All we have to go on are the written words in the text. These are some of the early depictions of the Ark of the Covenant, from an Old Testament Bible Victorian book to a 1708 edition of Josephus's Jewish History and Augustine and Calmet's Historical, Critical, Geographical, Chronological, Etymological Dictionary of the Holy Bible from 1732, as well as a copper engraving by Bleswick. Those cherubim covering the Ark of the Covenant? Well, winged guardians can be seen in a number of Egyptian motifs. This is from King Tut's shrine. Here you see the procession of Amun-Ra's divine bark from the relief from the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut. In the Egyptian origin of the Ark of the Covenant, Scott B. Nagel notes that, like the Ark of the Covenant, sacred barks were carried on poles by priests, the so-called pure ones, who had performed purification rituals in order to hoist the bark. Though most Egyptian rituals were never witnessed by the public, the procession of the sacred bark was an important exception. There is no denying the parallels from Egypt. Here you see a colorized photo from King Tut's tomb discovery in 1923. Note the box and the long poles. Also take note of the fringed linen shawl covering the anubis and the chest, similar to the fringed prayer shawl of the Hebrews. Historically, scholars have been puzzled why the Israelite Ark of the Covenant had 2 poles that were never removed even when the Ark and its cherubim were placed in the Holy of Holies, hidden behind a curtain. The Egyptian Ark not only had cherubim but also poles, And we have pictures of the Egyptian priests carrying their ark from place to place while holding it by its poles. From 1899 to 1901, in his Hebrew commentary on the Bible, Mikra Ki Feshutu, Arnold Ehrlich suggested that the poles were left in the ark because from time to time the priests or Levites would carry the ark to various communities so that the people could see it and perhaps donate toward the maintenance of the temple. It appears Ehrlich was right. We also see the ark carried into battle in several biblical scriptures. Moses told the priests to lead the ark into battle against the Midianites. Numbers 31:6. The ark went in front of the marchers around Jericho. Joshua 6:6-8. King Saul had the ark carried into battle in 1 Samuel 14:18, as did King David, 2 Samuel 11:11. Likewise, we see the Egyptian ark carried into battle in the Ramses relief of the Battle of Kadesh. We'll move to a very curious parallel that caught us off guard when we first read it. The striking similarities in the literary composition of Psalm 104 and the great hymn to the Aten. The hymn to Aten is written by Pharaoh Akhenaten, and it mirrors Psalm 104 as a song of praise to the Creator, though it was written some 600 years before the psalm. Psalm 104, of course, is addressed not to the Aten, but to Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews. The great hymn's congruencies with Psalm 104 reflects concepts that weren't seen in Egyptian writings before or after Akhenaten's period of reign. To give you an idea of these similarities, I thought it would be best to showcase them side by side. O sole God, beside whom there is none, Yahweh my God, you are very great. How many are your deeds? You made the earth as you wished, you alone, all peoples, herds, and flocks. Yahweh, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. When you set in western light, and earth is in darkness as if in death. You make darkness, and it is night when all the animals of the forest come creeping out. Every lion comes from its den. The young lions roar for their prey. When the sun rises, they withdraw and lie down in their dens. When you have dawned, they live. When you set, they die. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die. You set every man in his place. You supply their needs. Everyone has his food. These all look to you to give them their food in due season. The entire land sets out to work. People go out to their work and to their labor until the evening. The fish in the river dart before you. Your rays are in the midst of the sea. Yonder is the sea, great and wide. Creeping things innumerable are there. Birds fly from their nests, their wings greeting your caw. By the streams, the birds of the air have their habitation. They sing among the branches. He makes waves on the mountain, like the sea, to drench their fields and their towns. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow forth from the hills. The trees of Yahweh are watered abundantly. French scholars Roger and Masad Sabah, who are French Jews from a rabbinical family, detailed that not only are the ideas identical in the great hymn in Psalm 104, but also the order of words and Hebrew letters follow the Egyptian hieroglyph shapes in precisely the same positions in the psalm. An example can be seen in the Hebrew sheen, as the root letter for the vegetation desh copies the Egyptian shape for vegetation, a wavy W. To end this presentation, we go to the beginning. The beginning of creation, that is, the parallels between the Genesis Egyptian creation accounts. James Hoffmeyer, author of Israel and Egypt, The Evidence for Authenticity of the Exodus Tradition, is just one of many scholars who has drawn compelling parallels between Hebrew and Egyptian concepts of creation. We were very fortunate to interview Alan Austin, author of The Messianic Temple, who sheds light from a fresh perspective on the Genesis account. The connections he draws between the earliest creation accounts from Egypt are so striking in their parallels that Alan says it is the same story. Check out his interview in this series. The greatest similarity between the creation stories of Genesis and the early Egyptian religions is that there is a creation story, and both accounts of creation are marked by 7 days. Hebrew and Egyptian religions organized their stories into days of creation, with the first day being the creation from a formless darkness of turbulent water. The second day in Hebrew tradition concerns the creation of the sky, while the Egyptian second day concerns creation of air and moisture. The third day for the Hebrews saw the creation of the earth. For the Egyptians, day 3 was the creation of the earth and sky. The fourth day for both accounts was the creation of day and night. Days 5 and 6 for the Hebrews saw the creation of animals, plants, and humans, with the seventh day a day of rest. For the Egyptians, days 5, 6, and 7 concerned the creation of animals, plants, and humans. An interesting side note is in the Egyptian count, God is seen as a potter forming humans out of clay, just as God created Adam from the clay of the earth. God as a potter is also a theme that's presented in several biblical texts like Job. A detailed description of how he created humans is found at Esna Temple, where the work of Khnum was seen as a continuous task. He was portrayed as a deity sitting on his potter's wheel, constantly working and creating life. This is in contrast to day 7 of the Genesis account, where God rests. This is by no means a comprehensive list of Egyptian parallels to the Bible, but they are some rather intriguing connections that you may not have been aware of. However firmly a believer may hold to the Bible as their authoritative text to govern their life, we have sincerely endeavored to separate emotions from the text of the Bible, not by defending already existing dogmas, but as a means to understanding the origins of where some religious beliefs are rooted. How has this affected our understanding of biblical texts? To sum up in the words of the Sabbahs, whether this God is one or many, visible or invisible, he is the same manifestation in the Bible as in ancient Egypt. The universal God does not concern himself with rivalries. At the origin of creation, he has stood for goodness, for love among humanity. We hope this has inspired you to take a leap to conduct your own investigation and draw your own conclusions. Again, check out the other videos in the Ancient Egyptian and Bible series.